Okay, thanks everyone for coming. Zoom people tell me if you don't hear me. So the walls of this math department pressed me to give a math style of talk where I introduce how pieces move for 5 minutes and then immediately jump into subtleties of modern theory. But I'll try to be better than this. Instead, I will just randomly think aloud about chess for an hour. As I was preparing it, I discovered that I can randomly think aloud for like 4 hours, so I had to abridge significantly what I wanted to say. And without wasting any further time, I want to start with a question that was bothering me from the childhood, which was, as I was a kid, I was playing a lot of preference with my parents, which is like a Russian brother of poker, and I hated it wholeheartedly. I experienced frustration and boredom. I was telling my parents, this sucks. And they said, yes, but sorry, that's what we play. And then I thought, I know why, because, well, that's random. Like chess is deterministic and card games are random. And why would you subject yourself to being dependent on a random chance? However, as I played a lot of classical games, I should say chess does feel very random to me. And if we take my games, which are like 45 minutes per player, so like quick classical, I would say half of my games feel like they end up like with a pretty unfair result. And if you look also at the process of playing chess, well, you are faced with a number of lines, a huge number of lines, potentially millions of lines that you have to consider, and you somehow choose to scratch the surface in a very specific way by choosing very specific lines. And then you are prone to making an error as you look into those lines. And altogether, this does look very uncertain. So how is this not random? And I'm not mentioning that you can hallucinate something or that you can go low on time and then it's just a coin flip. I would say chess is pretty random. And this randomness, of course, is not the same as like rolling dice because, well, in theory, you can calculate all of it. And in theory, there's no like internal built-in stochasticity. However, if I try to draw the line precisely, I fail without going into like interpretations of quantum mechanics. Like, I mean, when you roll a dice, can you maybe also potentially calculate its trajectory? So it's a bit tricky to give a precise definition of a deterministic game that I would find satisfying. The one that I give here is pretty good in my eyes. It's like if you're given the same information and you play the same moves, that outcome is the same. Here, chess is obviously different from like some dice game. However, it doesn't mean that chess is non-random. It is random in this Bayesian sense. Let's say you run an experiment to find out if your drug works. Well, a priori it either does or doesn't. It doesn't make sense to speak about probabilities of it working or not. But if you interpret probability as degree of your uncertainty about it, so if you interpret probability in Bayesian sense, then it's fine to speak about probability of the drug working or not working given the data that you observe. And in the Bayesian sense, probability does play a role in the game of chess. So why do I like chess much more than poker then? Well, maybe because while it's also random, it's less random, meaning at least you don't have a genuine roll of a dice, and probably the standard deviation is lower, meaning you are going to converge to the fair result faster, and you are more entitled to expect to have a fair result or a result that represents your strength of play. In chess, you always lose because you played worse than your opponent, at least in some sense. And in chess, it's probably just easier to understand why you lost because, well, unlike the game of cards, if you play chess, you can immediately analyze the game. And there, all uncertainty disappears. You know for sure where you went wrong, which enables higher satisfaction, I think, because you know what you did wrong. And so your inner sense of fairness is more satisfied, but also you know what to do in order to learn. And continuing this description, I'd say that chess is in general simple to be understandable, which doesn't apply to many card games. but it's also complicated enough to be called infinitely inexhaustible and rich. And I also call it continuously engaging in the following sense. In poker, again, not poker, let's say preference, I found myself bored all the time because half of the time I would be just waiting for cards to reach my hand and I would be absolutely idle. In chess, 95% of the time you do have an obvious thing to think about. So you are always active, at least if you choose so. This also reminds me of volleyball. I hate volleyball partially because of this reason, because if the ball doesn't fly directly at you, you have literally nothing to do. Whereas in soccer, you can move all the time and it does impact the game at all times. Okay, that's my like letter of warm words to chess. But it's been like 10 minutes in a row without speaking about math, which is unacceptable. So let's ask ourselves the following question. How is chess mathematical? Well, there's a stereotype that math people are good at chess and vice versa, which seems to be true because the overlap that I see is absolutely enormous. It's funny to ask yourself why this is the case. For me, it's also interesting to see how I can capitalize on my like relative math strengths if I play chess. And so I constantly ask myself, how is chess actually math and how chess is not math? Well, first of all, there is an analogy with competitive math, and chess is also competitive. How convenient. In my high school, there was sort of a meme expression, notice that. This is how we characterized problems whose solutions start with the phrase, notice that. Notice that these series are actually Maclaurin series for some random function, so you know this value. Notice that this integral is solvable by this U substitution. There is no systematic approach. These problems defy logical analysis. Instead, they call for just recognition of a certain pattern. They call for insight. And here chess is, of course, very similar to those competitive math problems because, well, notice that kind of reasoning is all over the place. How do you analyze any chess position? You analyze it by saying, well, notice that if I go here, you go there, and so on. In particular, tactics, so short combinations that you try to learn to recognize in chess, they don't follow logically from a position. They just randomly appear, and you have to notice that they appear when they appear. You have to learn that, and there is no better way to learn it than just to like solve 1,000 and 10,000 problems. Just like we tell our students in calculus, tell them, take this integral 1,000 times and you will feel more comfortable. I always felt very unsatisfied telling them this because what am I learning them? What am I teaching them? Sorry, what are they supposed to learn? So in this sense, chess is comparable to competitive math, but I don't find it to be like real math. It's not scientific, it's not systematic, it's very insight-based. So I'm not satisfied by this explanation why chess is mathematical. There's this side of it, but I wish there would be more to chess. And another analogy with math that begs to be made is how calculation-based math is. And here I don't only mean that, of course, if you calculate lines, like I take you, you take me, it resembles something like multiplying numbers following some algorithm. But more generally, I think of any task that requires a lot of working memory. Let's say you have an abstract formula, and you have a concrete manifestation of this formula where you plug in something, and you have to constantly remember which role the things play, like what you plug in instead of what. I noticed that a lot of my students struggle when they have to plug in things into the formula because they become confused as to what is what. Like they have this integral f of x, what is f here, what is dx, like if you use up what becomes f of x. And this is, in my head, reminiscent of how you calculate some line in chess, and at some point you have to remember which piece stands where, and it requires a lot of working memory because it's just a lot of things to keep in mind at once. People who have better visualization probably will not agree, saying that they can just see the board, but unfortunately I cannot, so I have to rely on my working memory very heavily, which leads to very funny oversights quite often. Here, I would expect math people to excel, and here maybe lies the explanation why most people are good at chess so often. But again, it's not like intrinsically scientific. What I would love to see in chess is logic. What I would like to see is some systematic study. So what about it? Well, about the chess science, I will speak in the end. Hopefully I will be in time. And now I will like to focus on logic and its manifestation in chess. So in general, if you only play fast time control, if you never play chess, then you probably never noticed how logic can manifest in chess. But if you play slow time control, then sometimes logic becomes of paramount importance. That's a very grotesque example of how you can outsmart chess gods by just being somewhat of a logical human. So Fritz is an old engine. It's stronger than any human, but it's weaker than modern engines. Modern engines such as Stockfish, state-of-art modern engine, rating 3,500, like new neural network based and stuff. Fritz says 8, you could count it like advantage in pieces. So Fritz says like extra 8 pawns for white, like white is super duper winning. Stockfish says white is winning, but he suspects something. Well, there's human will immediately tell you, of course, this is a draw because nobody ever crosses this wall. Like the only way to cross this wall is to give away the queen. In which case, black has an extra knight, and he is probably still a draw. Only black can be better. So here you can see those engines as chess gods. They are born to calculate lines. They know how to calculate lines very well, and they know how to relate to position very well, but they don't have logic. They don't have reasoning. They are inferior to us when it comes to just normal arguments. So as I was thinking about this talk in the background weeks, whenever I was playing a game, I was thinking, okay, what could this illustrate for my talk? And I got a bunch of games. I realized that every game can illustrate some point that I'm making, but it will take forever to illustrate all of them. And it's self-indulgence in a sense, because it takes a lot of time, and it's probably not the best example either. It's just a game I recently played. Here, I just decided to self-indulge for one time, based on the game that I played 2 days ago, actually. This position never happened, but did happen in my calculation. So it was in one of those lines in the realm of hypothetical, where, again, the old engine says it's slightly better for white, like 50-50, white wins or draw. Strong engine says it's much better for white, and the human immediately says, like human who plays chess immediately says it's winning. So why is it winning? Well, how would a human logically approach this thing? So here I want to illustrate how chess is tractable to logic in some situations. How, yes. Great questions, thanks. So a human would approach it logically by saying, well, by looking at this knight and saying this knight is pinned to the king, so it doesn't move right now. Oh no. I was hoping for normal tables. This is terrible. Yeah, the knight is pinned. It's attacked twice by the rook and the bishop, and it's defended also twice. So right now it's not falling, right? But a human would immediately ask himself, how do I unpin the knight if I ever want to move it? To unpin it, I have to remove the king somewhere. But if I remove it like here, let's make a move. If I move it here, well, then the knight drops. So I have to move it somewhere as to keep the knight still defended. So what are the squares that are satisfying this? Well, there are only 2 squares which fulfill this desiderate, right? So we could try to move it here. But unfortunately, this again is denied because, well, the rook no longer defends it. So this doesn't work. Well, another attempt would be to move the king here, but then white can just, well, say, no, you're not coming here. And then again, a human logically, of course, continue immediately by saying, what if I challenge this pawn? White says, I don't care. If you take, I take back, and your problem is still remaining, which means that black doesn't move. So a human would immediately evaluate this position as black does not move at all, because there's just no way to unpin the knight, and any attempt will hang knight moreover with check, so no tricks for sure. Then the human will say, can I win, granted that my opponent doesn't move his pieces? Well, the human will immediately think, well, if my pawn tries to make a queen, to become a queen, there's nobody to stop it because pieces don't move. And the human will say, well, these are 3 pawns here versus 2. So I can potentially make a pass pawn here. And then the human can see that if that's the case, he can make a pass pawn and then he wins easily. And notice how this whole argument is very logical. We are focusing just on like the logical aspect. The knight, yes. It's not obvious, yes, because this, when you start, you have to unpin the knight temporarily. A5 I taken, I just ran.
No, A5, B8.
You mean A5 here?
A4, A5, and white plays A5.
Okay, yeah. Sorry.
A4 rook D8.
Oh, no, I'm not playing A5, I'm playing C5.
You're playing C5?
Yes.
No, but with rook on D7, you're just playing C5. Okay.
Yeah, because I then take this with check and then I trade rooks and I just promote.
Okay.
Yeah, some chess still requires it here, but and the point is, you're right with this calculation that we just went over by logic, because logically you know where to look. Cool. So this is just an illustration how, again, you can potentially be more productive in your chess line evaluation than chess gods. And that's satisfying. That's how logic does manifest in chess. Unfortunately, it doesn't work too often. I would say it works very rarely. You can run some logical arguments like this in the middle game, but your logic becomes fuzzy. You have to add some modality to it. You have to say like probably, like I probably can do this, and he probably should then do that. And of course, the like bigger your house of cards becomes that you build out of logic, the more vulnerable it is. And sometimes you think you're smart with your logic, and then the engine shows like concrete, brutal like refutation of it. It says like, you rely on some assumptions. For example, you rely on assumption that I will never give away a piece for a pawn. But since your house of cards is just so fragile and so awkward, I can give away the piece for the pawn and it will fall apart for you so bad that an extra piece will not help. And I had an illustration, but I realized I'm not in time to show it. So no examples here. Just trust me that like the more contrived your logic becomes in the middle of the game, the more vulnerable it becomes to concrete refutations. And a classy player will find it. He will sense when you are building something way too artificial. So that's on logic. And one thing I want to notice about logic in chess as homotopy type theorist is this logic is constructive. When I say the knight doesn't move, it's still a constructive statement. And when you calculate a line, it's constructive proof of existence, meaning I'll show you the concrete line. But chess also has non-constructive proof of existence, which I find very admirable. And it comes from the idea of inner balance in chess. Well, first of all, of course, you can see at some position and feel like there's something in it. And that's your intuition, but that's pattern recognition. We already discussed that. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm more talking about the idea of balance in chess. I find it remarkable that the game is so balanced. For example, the knight is cost like as much as the bishop. Like, why? It's so arbitrary. Like, the rules are so weird. Why should they be equi-powerful all of a sudden? And of course, all those evaluations depend on the context. Sometimes knight is much weaker. Like the queen can be. If you just randomly put a queen on the board and 3 pieces, probably the queen will just collect all of them. But in the middle game, 3 pieces are stronger. It depends on the context, but still, it's surprisingly balanced. And this idea of balance gives rise to some non-constructive proof of existence, where chess players would often run arguments such as, my opponent has not done enough to be already lost, which is a weird statement because it doesn't really, account for the position at all. It only accounts for the past. And it says like the position initially was equal because it's symmetric and we know it's equal. And then things happen, symmetry was broken completely, but somehow we know that the evaluation is still around equal, unless you did something stupid. And if you haven't done something stupid, then your next move, your best next move, somehow is the one that keeps this almost equality. Okay, that's the last time where I indulge showing my game. So in this game, my opponent played an unsound opening, which is very rare case in like float control. And I got very frustrated because I didn't want to play this garbage. Unfortunately, I didn't call the concrete refutation of it, so I did not get in totally winning position here. But regardless, here, what can I say about the position? Well, white is very undeveloped. This rook is fine, but to develop this knight, for example, you have to move a pawn, then you have to move the knight out, move another knight out, and it takes a while. And only two pieces of white are actually like good and well developed. And I did a weird thing, which is I started to jump with these pieces which are already developed, instead of like developing new pieces, which I'm not going to excuse now. I'll just say I didn't feel like playing this game at all after his opening, so I wanted it to be over quickly. But the point is, my opponent replied with a logical move. He wants to develop this stuff, so he develops, right? Because he wants to eventually place his queen somewhere here, make long castle, and claim that he is doing fine despite his terrible opening choice. And so these two moves that he made are very logical. You would expect them to be potentially best moves in the position because he just developed his bishop on a normal square. Whereas what I did is a bit nonsense because I'm jumping with the pieces that are already developed, so it's very suspicious. The problem with this concrete position on the board is that black can resign. For example, he removed the queen, and for those who play chess, h6 wins because bishop f6, bishop f6, and this hangs in this hangs. So this whole line here, this move that he made is already a losing, despite the fact that it's logical. And at the same time, you will think about this in a way that black hasn't done enough to be already lost. You would say, well, white is doing something weird. He's attacking with one knight and one bishop, basically. And black hasn't committed enough sins, probably, to be lost. Then how come? And if you are playing black and you realize that this move loses, then you start to think maybe that's not the best move in the position. And if you only think about like current position without keeping this context and the idea of the balance, you will think, well, that's the most natural move, that's the most logical move. How come it's bad? And if you discover that it's bad, you think, oh, maybe I'm screwed because the most logically looking move is bad. However, the logic here is a bit twisted. You say the most logically looking move is bad, but I shouldn't be lost. So there is some illogically looking move that's good. So just by knowing that this move is not good enough, you arrive at the conclusion that there is a move that is good. And so you somehow know that there is some trick, even though maybe your pattern recognition actually doesn't say so. Again, for those who play chess, here it's actually pretty simple. You go here, and suddenly the bishop is creating problems, and the position is equal. But maybe you don't find natural the idea that you start jumping with your knight back and forth when you just want to develop. However, this inner idea of the balance proves to you that there must exist a good move, and now you're forced to arrive at this naturally moving move because you know it exists. And maybe that's not the best example, but again, I started to think about recently in this game I played recently, so this best example I could come up with from the games I remember. But in general, this logic is quite fascinating sometimes because you're very confident that something exists without having a single clue as to where to look for it. All right, so this has gone very chessy, so we need a break. We need to put on smooth jazz and embark on an interlude. Let's talk about life. Yes. Logical subject? What?
Like they might have different logic.
By logic, I mean like formal system of manipulating symbols, which is well defined. I mean, fuzzy logic probably is different for other people, but
like chess plays, like you're talking a lot about like the Russian school of chess, like Russian part of chess, like which like it's not really there like in other parts of the world. Like,
I don't talk about Russian school of chess.
how does your Russian school of chess in there?
Well, that's I guess my origin because I didn't mean this at all. Yeah, I mean, when I say like the move doesn't feel natural or stuff, here I don't mean that I don't imply that I'm using strict logic here. So it was not an example of logic. When I say like he is pinned, so he is forced to unpin, which he cannot do because there are no squares, this is logic. When I mean this is more chess science, and it's of course not strictly logical, which I will also discuss later. Right. So yeah, thinking about life. So okay, chaos requires this brain thing to work, which in my case malfunctions all the time. So chess made me wonder: can you make the brain work at least sometimes? 3 times in my life, I've had a situation where if I win the game, I become a master, and guess my win rate. It's not. It's 0. It's 0 because like it was like a draw. It was sufficient at some point, but I never won in such a setup. So I was wondering, can I like make my brain work at least for an hour? Maybe take a loan, maybe I make it for terrible afterwards, but just for an hour. The answer seems to be no. But luckily, there are a number of things that you can try to do to at least improve your cognitive performance for a day or maybe more permanently. And the first piece of advice is pretty universal. If you are overweight or you're underweight or you're depressed or you have insufficient energy or you have too much energy or you have, I don't know, an autoimmune disease, it doesn't matter. Exercise is known to be a universal pill. In particular, it's well studied in the context of cognition, and you can find reams and reams of research papers on how exercise boosts cognitive performance. In particular, if you just go for an acute bout of exercise before a cognitive task, then it's supposed to help. I don't include any references because literature is so vast, and it's at the same time not entirely consistent that you should just Google yourself and you should just pick yourself exercises that work for you because it doesn't really seem to matter all that much. To my surprise, it doesn't seem to be the case that people get tired. I usually try to avoid like high intensity training before playing because I thought maybe being tired will compromise my performance. So that's what they study the most somehow. They like to make people like exercise on a bike really hard and stuff like that. And executive function seems to not be impaired. So even that seems to work good enough. Unless you do 2 intensity training in a row, this has been shown to impair cognitive performance. And more long term, it seems that if you don't exercise for like too long, then your brain starts to work poorer in general. And if you wonder about mechanism, well, obvious one is arousal. You get those catecholamines such as dopamine, adrenaline. They help you focus. Another pathway that's believable is cerebral blood flow, and there are many other, maybe speculative, like anti-inflammatory pathway, lactate pathway, and like dozens and dozens of others. But at least we see by just conducting experiments that it does work. Another more or less universal suggestion is the fiber. I didn't find any studies actually checking that, but my speculation is that you want the uptake of glucose by your brain to be evenly distributed in time. You don't want a spike of sugar followed by some trough. And since fiber tends to slow down the absorption of sugar in the intestines, and it has been, of course, shown to lead to this even level of blood sugar throughout the time, I would expect this to help with the brain as well. I don't know the proofs, but it sounds logical. And here the thing is, even if it doesn't work, you still eat fiber. It's good for like 10 other reasons. Just like with exercise, it's a very safe recommendation to give because it's it can hardly go wrong, even if it doesn't work for this particular purpose. If we talk about arousal, then of course, again, my speculation would be if you go for something that increases adrenaline and dopamine, such as cold exposure or hyperventilation, then again, maybe it will help. Maybe it can compromise some cerebral blood flow or something like this. So again, approach with caution, but in theory, if you are facing something like a complex analysis, wow, and you have to perform a lot of notice that kind of tricks, and you are also potentially underslept and stressed, then, well, you can experiment with this. Speaking of being underslept, creatine has been shown last year in one paper to offset the cognitive impairment coming from sleep deprivation. So if you are underslept, this will help. If you are not underslept, creatine should not help. L-tyrosine helps if you are stressed and underslept. This is pretty well proven. It's less clear if it helps if you are already at your best. Maybe yes, maybe not. I don't know. You can try. I've been taking L-tyrosine, but any data is hard to believe in. Polyphenols is more of like long-term thing. If you constantly take them, then maybe this. I think here the pathway is via cerebral blood flow. These are things that give berries their color, for example. So if you eat a lot of blueberries or a lot of eggplant skin, then you're maybe in a good position to be also anti-inflammatory and so full of blood in your brain. And with regards to sleep, I probably will not surprise you if I tell you that, well, you have to sleep sometimes. Maybe I will surprise you a little bit more if I say that if I need to play good chess, I would rather sleep for 4 hours than 10. When I sleep like a lot, like 10 hours, 9 hours, it's always disastrous. So somehow sleeping a lot, for me at least, has proven to be a recipe for a disaster. Okay. Jazz music stops. Let's go back to chess. Let's talk about philosophy and chess in life. You know, in Russian part of the internet, at some point there was popularity among some people for like pseudo intellectual phrases, and they were often attributed to Jason Statham. Don't ask me why. And that Jason Statham, as it happens in very ironic Russian culture, became a byword for the cringy pseudo-scientific quotes, not scientific, but pseudo like intellectual metaphors. And I feel very Jason Statham as I'm approaching an attempt to like draw some parallels between chess and real life, because I mean, look at this cringe. Like, what is this? And most probably it will not make much sense, but I think at least to some extent I can try to draw parallels without being completely cringy. And luckily I have little time, so I won't be in time to make little sense for too long. All right, so first of all, you could argue that chess is, of course, like an exercise in decision making, which is very far-fetched, I guess, because calculating a chess line is not the same as, navigating the real life circumstances. Like, what is the analog of calculation in real life? Is intuition the same intuition as in chess in real life? It's not clear to me, and so this I'm not confident about at all. But if I were to speculate, I would notice a couple of things. First of all, our intuition seems to be very impressive. There is this Moravec paradox that says that it's easy to program things like reasoning, things that are hard for us, but it's hard to program things that are easy for us, such as throwing of the ball. Explaining it, the common explanation is that, well, evolutionary speaking, cognition is very young, whereas things like throwing the ball we do with our ancient brain that had much more time to develop. And intuition is like our ancient brain, and it's pretty powerful. Think of it, we traverse this absolutely enormous tree of calculation of lines in chess, and we do it very efficiently. Even I pretty often have games where I play the engine strengths. And what's my computational efficiency compared to the engine? What's my computational power? It's like orders of magnitude lower. So my intuition is just like anybody's intuition is very impressive in this sense, which sounds somewhat optimistic in this days of artificial intelligence. At the same time, it shows you the obvious limitation of your intuition. For example, let's say you make a decision of whether or not to trust somebody. Well, it's kind of a position that you play, and you've seen positions like this before, and you played it before, and you made some subconscious inference, and your intuition tells you, like, don't trust them, for example. Well, chess is maybe a very simplified version of the same, where you had the same position or similar position maybe hundreds of times before. And the rules are very simple. The amount of variables is relatively low. So in chess, the situation is more favorable for you. And yet in chess, how much can you trust your intuition? How much can you trust your evaluation of a position? Well, not that much. There is an obvious limitation to it. Like, whatever you say about the position, you cannot be more than like 90% sure, even though you had a lot of prior experience to learn from. Not as much as the neural networks takes, but still more than usually you have in real life. So in real life, my expectation would be that you have even much less grounds for confidence. So if you like don't trust somebody intuitively, well, since it's a binary question, your least confidence is 50%. How much high is this? How much closer to 100% are you taken by your intuition? Well, I would then speculate that no more than halfway through, so no more than 75%. So people, when they trust their intuition a lot, strike me as misguided. And I think chess illustrates that. It's not that chess opens my eye to this fact, but I think it does provide a good illustration. Another thing that chess illustrates is that we can calculate it all. If there is something that resembles a chess calculation in real life, then you will fail. And even if we just speak about decision making, which doesn't imply word visualization, like working memory, if it just comes to rationality, then again, chess shows that even best players often justify their moves by some pretty ridiculous means. So decision making is very suspicious even for top players. Well, one most primitive example where it's more subconscious is how you calculate, how you prune the tree and you repeatedly keep coming back to the same line. Recently, I had a situation where I calculated this a move for a while, and then I realized the king's mate in one move. And well, I could say, okay, maybe I was just considering other response at first, so I could never look for other move from my opponent, so maybe it's not openly stupid. But then I kept returning to this move. And I kept thinking, oh, what's up with this move? Let's calculate it again. And then like, oh, wait a second, it was king mate in one. It's definitely not quite rational. And decision-making of chess players is very suspicious. The optimistic conclusion from chess may be that in a chess middle game, and real life is probably like middle game, where stakes are relatively low and the amount of lines is very high, it's hard to like blunder the game away completely. Like even if you make a mistake, even if you like blunder a piece in one move, you have enough time to recover. And usually middle game provides you with enough resources to always hope for something. And well, in particular, I very rarely, as a person who likes to blunder easily, I very rarely lose in the middle game because even if I blunder there are too many resources to recover. And this means that in real life, it's probably also pretty hard to blunder in one move. Like blunder your position away, meaning like whatever move you make, it's probably going to be fine. It's fine. So if you are too concerned about some decision in your life, just think that it's fine. If the dilemma seems to be very hard, then it's probably the moves are pretty much equal, and it's just a matter of taste. And it won't be a lethal mistake of you to choose one path or another. Okay, so this is what chess teaches us about our problem solving and decision making. And finally, if we just regard chessboard as something that where things happen to us, like as I've been talking about in the beginning, you don't really control with high certainty what happens on the board. So to an extent, things on the board happen to you, and in real life, things also happen to you outside of your control. And what could be a parallel here? Well, here I would like to return to this point of chess science. And whatever you call the Soviet school of chess. So if you look at chess science of the past, it really tries to be quote unquote mathematical and logical. there are very dogmatic rules, and people really try to make inferences from those rules and prove that games went the way they went because of some rules. And it's very naive now that you look at it, and now that we have engines, because, well, armed with the wisdom of engines, we see how, in reality, well, chess principles work like half of the time. And chess science is, well, looking extremely naive now. What I mean is, in the past, people would say like, oh, we focus on good pawn structure, or like, oh, we're being attacked, then logically we're already lost. And now the engine says, well, you have to arrange your pieces in such a way that would allow accidents to happen. Let me illustrate it for those who are less, maybe, well versed in chess. Well, if you look at this position, for example, and look, let's put 2 pawns so that it's not a draw. This position is lost for white because this move, I said black. Oh my God, thanks. It's a check is my favorite phrase. I've lost so many games with it. Like, oh damn it, it was a check. Yeah, so here this works. This forks the king and the rook. So this I wanted to put my pawns on the G file. I wanted to put my pawns on the G file, but then I kind of forgot. Anyway, it's a draw. Still, my point remains the same. The position is very specific. If you look at it from afar without glasses, you will say white is winning. If you zoom in at it, you realize that like there's very concrete like accident that happened. Like these 2 pieces happen to be on the same diagonal, and this is what we call tactics. By the way, this is like a short combination that doesn't logically follow from the way the position looks. Right. So if the king was here, it would be a whole different story. And that's an accident. That's an accident that we call tactics. And what the engine shows that is that chess, like good chess, very much relies on tactics. I mean, the engine really likes to rely on things that don't look logical at all. That really likes to rely on very concrete aspects of the position. It says, well, go here, attack this thing, and if they defend, you can attack that thing. It looks very unnatural to an experienced chess player. To a beginner, it looks natural because the beginner just attacks things. And the more experienced player knows that if you attack, I just defend. Doesn't make much sense. But the engine finds very intricate ways to attack things in such a way that it prevents you from doing what you want to do. An illustration is this tabia, this well-known position from an opening, which again players of the past, of course, despised for black, and which I despised for black when I was more naive, because as I was naive, I would say that this one is weak, this one is weak, this one is weak, this one is weak, this square is weak, this one is also potentially weak. And for white, you can say anything like this. Like white position look fine. I mean, this knight looks silly, but I mean, eventually it will get out somewhere, right? Well, the engine says not right, because black will always find something. Black will always find some ways to attack you in an annoying way. And no matter what you do, you will never succeed in like actually exploiting these weaknesses the way you would expect it. Like when I was playing this as white, as a more naive player, I was thinking, okay, now I will put my knight here and I will just consolidate my position and everything will be amazing. And black would always find some counter resources. He would always bite me somewhere and always distract me. And I would think, what an unfortunate accident. I was winning, but I couldn't capitalize on my obvious static advantage. But there is no real advantage because static advantage is completely compensated by dynamic counterplay black has here. And this unfortunate accident happens to white every time he tries to do it, provided black plays well. So in this opening, the idea that unfortunate accidents happen for white is the key idea. The whole point of the opening is there always will be some annoying and very concrete and very randomly looking thing that nonetheless spoils white's plans. And the same thing with defending in modern times. And the engine says that like there are always resources when you want to defend. Or if a position looks bad, it actually may not be. It may not be said bad objectively because again there will be some hidden resources. And the engine says that hidden resources are a rule. It's not an exception. It's normal. And provided you play reasonable chess, you should expect, not hope for, but expect those accidents to happen. And so this question mark is what's very non-mathematical in nature. It's mathematical in the sense that it tells you that there's a law of large numbers, right? If there are a lot of lines, that you will find something if there are a lot of chances. So if you create those chances for yourself, then opportunities will come to you, which is again not big news for me with regards to real life, but recently I started to see the analogy very well. For example, when I came in the US, I noticed how many things happen here. People have money, people always do something, and there is no general system to it, but every once in a while some funny thing happens. Like I remember my first year, somebody decided to give $500 to every student, and all of a sudden I received $500 for nothing, which is great in an environment where things happen. And that's also one of the ways I was advertising in grad school for people. I mean, this taps into this point. I was saying in grad school, you are surrounded by your peers, which a priori doesn't guarantee you anything but a nice small talk, but which makes your social position very good. Your social piece is very good. And this enables like very lucky social accidents, which then actually are not that accidental if you think about it. The analogy, I mean, the example that comes to my mind as I look at this pink cake on this date is my girlfriend kind of fell on me from the sky. Well, at least that's how it looks. And I want to emphasize that I do definitely still feel extremely lucky about us. The general fact that it started is to a great extent a logical product of just the very good position that we were in, which is like we're in the grad housing, we are grad students, we are sometimes leaving the house. And so it's not as ridiculous of an accident as you would think. It feels like it's like 1 in a million. In reality, it's much less than that. And in particular, if you like feel lonely on this day, because the static factors of your position make you think that you're screwed, then you may underestimate the dynamics of your position, and you may underestimate how prone accidents are to happening. Because this, why did I give you this history of chess? Is to illustrate that in this simplistic setup, people vastly underestimated the role of a chance. They didn't realize that the chance is actually one of the key players in the game, and the static factors are not actually most important. So this makes me think that in real life, maybe we also underestimate how much of systematic things, how much of a systematic thing exceptional things are. And more generally, if things don't go your way, if again statically it looks like you don't find a scenario how things will work out, you can still be confident that some very good thing will happen just despite the odds, just because your position was reasonable, because it's a rule that good things accidentally happen if you play reasonable moves, of course. Thank you. Any questions?
So the live strat is play for activity.
Yes, exactly. But activity in the right sense of the word, yeah. Yes.
In the last you
Last game. That's not a game. That's my opening.